I interviewed with Channel 3 yesterday. They said businesses, we know businesses need this. They told us on article. And I understand some of them are getting cold feet. Yes.
It's a lot of things. I like the idea of buying for taxes. When we look at taxes on some other thing, if we did it, if we did 1%.
Okay, we're going to get started.
They get to
Our chair is, I don't know where his chair is, so we'll get going. Good morning. Welcome to the January 19th meeting of the LCAR committee. And I think we'll start by doing introductions. I'll start to my left.
Anthea Dexter Cooper from the Office of Legislative Counsel. I help the committee.
And Representative Mark Higley, I represent the Orleans Lamoille District.
Representative Carol Odie, Burlington.
Jenny Lyons, Senator representing Chittenden Southeast.
Seth Bongartz, I represent the Arlington, Manchester, Sandgate, and Liver of Sunderland.
Chris Bray, I represent the Addison Senate District.
Trevor Squirrel representing Underhill and Jericho, and
Charlie Dinder, Lindsay Schreier, administrative assistant.
oh, here's our chair. I will carry it. Want to introduce yourself real quick?
Mark McDonald, Orange County. Thank you very much. Apologize for being late.
First item on the agenda are the minutes from the January 5th, 2023.
I make a motion, we approve the minutes.
Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you very much. The first order of business is Rule 22 P06, Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, regulations for control of pesticides. We've had multiple meetings regarding this rule, and at the last meeting, we postponed for some dialogue between the Department of Health and the Agency of Ag, and we have received some changes to the rule. And so, Mr. Hoover, would you like to come up here? I don't see Department of Health represented here, so I guess you're speaking for both.
Sure, no problem. Good morning, members of LCAR. Dave Huber, Deputy Director of the Public Health and Agricultural Resource Management Division with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. Talking about the pesticide rule and the some changes to it. So first off, I would just like to thank members of LCAR. This has been a spirited discussion. We're on our fourth meeting, and the Agency of Agriculture certainly appreciates the back and forth that we've had about this in order to make a very good rule and have good pesticide regulation in the state. Speaking on behalf of both the Agency of Agriculture and the Department of Health, as you said, Representative Squirrel, we do have some language that we submitted to you all as members, as well as to Legislative Council. For this set of language here, Commissioner of Health and Secretary of Agriculture had a good conversation. The general counsels for both of our agencies had a very good conversation. And this is the language that we have come up with that we do believe takes care of all the issues that this committee raised at the last time that we met a couple weeks ago. And so with that, I just want to thank the members of the committee and be available for any questions that you have.
Senator Bray.
Thanks very much for the follow-up between the last meeting and this. And it's been a little awkward to have different concerns expressed so belatedly in the process, and then we have another round of amendments. I have just one question about the proposed language. If it says prior to the issuance of any permit for aerial truck-mounted pesticide application, Secretary shall consult with the Department of Health to evaluate whether issuing the permit would cause a significant public health risk. So can you just explain a little bit procedurally what would happen if the department, as I understand it, Ag still retains the authority to issue the permit? I don't quite understand what happens if, in a hypothetical, the Department of Health said, we do think this poses a significant public health risk. Ag would still be free to go ahead and issue the permit. So how do you anticipate that working?
I anticipate that working with intense dialogue between the two agencies so that we're able to talk about the differences and hopefully resolve the matter in a way that's favorable to all Vermonters. If it turns out that the Department of Health has a very valid reason as to why they would not want a permit to go through, then I think that has to be assessed and evaluated. And I also believe that that is what was discussed between the Commissioner Levine and Secretary Tebbets, as well as the general counsels for both of our entities. Again, we're looking to do what's best for Vermonters.
Sure. Thank you.
I have a question. Okay, I'm looking at significant public health risk, and I guess, actually, I'm going to turn to our alleged counsel, Michael Grady. You want to speak to some of our concerns about sort of how that's defined and not found elsewhere in statute? We talked about this the other day.
There is a statute in Title 8, or it's Title 18. I do believe that there is a definition of public health risk or public health hazard.
Okay.
So the Department of Health does have a standard that they can use.
Good. I still have a concern, okay? And the concern is that it seems to me that if in fact there's a significant public health risk, they should not be getting a permit.
Understood.
And what I'm hearing from the agency is that we'll talk about it. So I'm concerned about that. I need to feel more comfortable, I guess.
Sure. Director.
Steve Cornell, Director of Farm. If the Department of Health has a concern about a significant public health risk for the issuance of permit, we won't issue the permit, or we'll modify it to alleviate the risk. I mean, we're not going to issue a permit for the application of the pesticide if the Department of Health says, hey, there's a significant public health risk here. We're just not going to do it.
Okay, that's what I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Representative Higley.
No, if there's no further questions, again, we're at this for the fourth time, I guess, but I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
And I don't have my glasses, so I'm going to do my best. Anthony, of course, has written this out so that we can get it right. But I move that we approve 22 P06 for Vermont rule for control of pesticides with proposed modifications submitted by the Agency of Agricultural Markets. Correspondence is dated November 23rd, 2022, November 25th, 2022, December 13th, 2022, and January 17th, 2023.
I just said it was November 29th.
Oh, see, I told you my glasses.
Senator Lyons.
I just have a quick question about the definition of aerial or truck mounted. So if I have an old car and or a tractor, that's going to count here?
Not for aerial.
No, not for aerial or truck. So
Truck mounted would be a air blast sprayer that's on the back of a
ultra volume.
Yeah.
It's for mosquito control. It's mosquito adulticide application.
Specific to that permit. So if you're spraying for adulticides, then you would be meeting that definition. You cannot do that without the permit.
thank you.
Senator Bray.
So I'm happy that Representative Higley made that motion and plan to support it. I'd just like to note, as we're voting on it, that I think we'll want to we talked about, and I guess will come up later, we issue a committee, an LCAR letter to committees of jurisdiction to flag issues that are unaddressed in this rule that have come up during our testimony.
Thank you. Senator Hickley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think also, in making the motion, I've heard a number of times here from the agency that they're more than willing to continue to, take testimony from anybody in regards to other rules that may be required down the road. So I think that's helpful as well.
We have a discussion? Okay, we have a motion, and all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you all for your time, and the agency is very much looking forward to talking in the future about these topics with everybody and making sure that the correct information is out there for everyone.
Yeah, and we'll be sure to get a copy of any letters that we send to committees of jurisdiction, so you're aware of that.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you all.
Okay, next up is P22 E15, Department of Children and Families Transitional Housing Program Emergency Rules. Again, another item that's been on our agenda over multiple sessions. And at the last meeting, we gave notice to the Department of Health that we were considering objecting to the rule, and they were offered 2 weeks to respond to that objection. We're in receipt of a letter from Department of Health essentially saying that they stand by their rule and not offering any amendments or any changes to that. So that's the current status. I will turn to the
Children and Families, I think.
I'm sorry?
Was it the Department of Children and Families?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
I'm stand corrected.
Minor.
Okay. Thank you. I would like to give the folks from DCF an opportunity to say something if they wish before we proceed with more conversation, discussion amongst committee members.
Thank you. I'm Heidi Moreau, a policy advisor for the Department for Children and Families. As you noted, DCF does stand by its original position that the second emergency rule is substantially similar to the first and therefore aligns with legislative intent.
Before we
I'm just looking.
started, I think I would ask Anthea to sort of explain process here. That if in fact we agree to object and what that process is in terms of, so we all fully understand what that is, then I'll turn the floor back over to Senator Lyons.
So we need to remember that we're dealing with an emergency rule here and not a permanent rule. Under a permanent rule, because LCAR approval or objection has that 45-day window, you need to give the administration 14 days from an objection to respond. In the case of an emergency rule, you don't need to give them the opportunity to respond. You could have done the objection and the certification in the same meeting. However, under 3 VSA section 844, under subsection E1, there needs to be a majority vote of the entire committee to object, and that's a majority vote of the entire committee, not of those of you present. So it's 5 because you're still a committee of 8. And then there needs to be a second objection.
Well, done deal, man.
Yep.
There needs to be a second vote. Again, that's going to be a majority vote of the entire committee to file the objection in certified form with the Secretary of State. So if you're going to object, a majority of you need to object and have a grounds for your objection. And then if you wish to certify the objection, there needs to be a second majority vote of the entire committee. And as a reminder, that certified objection does not stop the rule from continuing to be in effect. This is an emergency rule. It's been in effect since the end of September 2022, but it places what I call that scarlet A on the rule so that if there is a legal challenge, it shifts the burden of proof to the agency too, and I'm just going to use legislative intent as the example here, to show that the rule was in fact consistent with legislative intent, despite the fact that this committee objected on that grounds. That's the procedural two-step process, 2 votes.
Senator Lyons.
Well, before I say anything, I think Sheila Livingston is on the screen and she may want to speak to the rule. I know that we sent a letter to the Department to DCF and told them we were considering objection last time. I gave them the date of January 19th. I didn't hear, I heard from Sheila Livingston yesterday that she would like to communicate with me about the rule. I think you misunderstood when the rule was coming up. So yeah, next week. So I'd like to give Sheila an opportunity to talk with the committee, if that's okay with the rest of the committee.
Yeah, just from a process standpoint, she's not on the agenda, and I'm okay with that, but I want to make sure the committee, any objection, without objection? Committee members? Okay. Ms. Livingston.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shayla Livingston. I'm the policy director for the Agency of Human Services, and I do really appreciate your consideration and letting me speak this morning. I think the main and most important thing that I wanted to communicate was that we really appreciate the dialogue that we've had with Senator Lyons, as well as some other members of the legislature around this program and this rule over time. As many of you know, it has been a real challenge, this program, because of the changing federal regulations around the funding that we use for it. And then in addition, all of the different moving pieces with the partners that we work with and the legislature and the additional funding that the legislature has provided for this group of clients that AHS serves. So with all of the levels of complexity and all of the different entities involved, we do really appreciate sort of the level of attention and also the conversations that we've had. We had talked about, because the LCAR's specific objection is around the date and the rule, the program, and I just want to thank DCF, did go back and try very hard to come up with a solution that involved something that didn't have the date specifically in the rule, and we couldn't figure that out. And so I just want to make sure folks know that we really did honor that and tried hard to come up with a different method to do that. The intent, and I know I can't, of course, speak specifically to your intent as that was yours, but our intent as the administration is very much to serve the population identified and to serve them through the winter and to have consistent housing for this group of people. And so I do hope that the committee also considers our intent, and I do think that our intent is aligned. The clarity that the October 1 date has in the rule right now, the other part of taking that out is changing that and making it feel and look like another large shift, which it can't be and it wouldn't be given other funding decisions that have been made in the legislature since then, could potentially cause confusion for the clients themselves and for Vermonters, and for us, of course, they need to be a very important audience for our work. So I want to make sure that the intent and that the energy coming from us is one where we are really trying to come to the table as a partner. We're sorry we couldn't come up with another option for how to do this in a way that continued to have consistency for these clients. And we do really appreciate all of the conversation and all of the work that has come from both the Joint Fiscal Committee and LCAR and House Human Services and Senate Health and Welfare. There's just been so many committees that have worked on this issue to support these people. So that's all I wanted to say. And again, thank you for taking the time to hear me.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think our job is quite limited and in terms of acceptance or objection, and there still has not been a change. So with all due respect to the great work that DCF is doing, and they are doing a great deal of good work for folks who are in need of transitional housing and housing overall. I still believe that we need to object to the rule and certify that objection today. It's gone on, but it's unfortunate. The inability of folks to apply for transitional housing is what is implicated as a result of the October 1st date. And so going forward, I'm actually looking forward to the full discussion on a more complete housing program for those who are homeless or find themselves in need of that safety net. So I'd like to make a motion, and I move that we object to section TH 1028 of 22E15 Transitional Housing Program Emergency Rules pursuant to 3 VSA paragraph 844E1B on the grounds that this portion of the rule is contrary to the intent of the General Assembly.
We have a motion from Senator Lyon. Any discussion? All those in favor of a motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
No.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Then I would also like to move that we file the objection to section TH 1028 of 22E15 Transitional Housing Program Emergency Rules in certified form with the Secretary of State pursuant to 3 VSA paragraph 844E2.
We have another motion from Senator Lyon certifying the previous objection. Motion. Any discussion? Also, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
No.
Motion carries. Thank you, Senator Lyons. And thank you, all the folks from Agency of Human Services. Appreciate your work, and sorry we didn't get to a different outcome, but thanks for your time and your energy and your group work. Thank you. Okay, next up on the agenda is Rule 22P24, Agency of Natural Resources Vermont Wetland Rules. I guess the black chair is the witness chair. That's what I've been told. And I don't recognize either one of you, so if you'll just do introductions, that'd be great.
Hi, go ahead. Good morning. I'm Laura LaPierre. I'm the DEC Wetland Program Manager.
And I'm Hannah Smith. I'm an attorney with the Agency of Natural Resources.
You had a Karina Daly on here too, but.
Yes, I'm over here.
Oh, okay. You part of this?
I am.
You can just grab a chair if you anywhere. Yeah, that's fine.
Whoever wants to start off.
Sure. Thank you to the committee. I will provide, this is Hannah Smith. I'm going to provide an overview of the proposed changes to the rule. The actual amendments are fairly limited in scope, but we believe they'll provide a lot of clarity in terms of the agency's jurisdiction over wetlands that have been determined to be significant. The proposed changes to the rule are limited to sections 4 and 8 of the rules and Appendix A, which identifies Class 1 wetlands. We're proposing the addition of 2 new Class 1 wetlands. There are also a few grammatical changes throughout that changing reference to the secretary from him or her to there as a grammatical update. I'll start with section 4.1. The amendments to section 4.1 include clarification of the secretary's statutory authority under 10 VSA 905B 18 to reclassify wetlands either in general or on a case-by-case basis. Section 4.4 is amended to clarify the purpose of the Vermont Significant Wetlands Inventory, which is the map layer provided that identifies Class 2 wetlands and Class 1 wetlands as well. Clarifies the secretary's ability to correct the location of existing mapped wetlands on the VSWI and provides more clarification on where the map layer can be found in the agency's resources. The bulk of the sort of substantive amendments come in section 4.6 of the rule. It re-articulates the agency's authority to reclassify wetlands in general, and it revises the current list of presumptive Class 2 wetlands and replaces it with a list of categorical Class 2 wetlands. The categorical Class 2 wetlands were determined to be significant based on an evaluation of their functions and values. The functions and values are articulated in statute. They're in 10 VSA 905B. It's the same list of functions and values that the agency has been using to define significant wetlands since this statutory language was adopted. The determination of significance of the categorical Class 2 wetlands is supported by a general wetland determination that the agency issued late last year. That determination was provided as part of the scientific information that was linked in the rulemaking package here. The language in section 4.6 as proposed also notes that categorical Class 2 wetland types may be determined by the secretary to be Class 3 on a case-by-case basis. So a landowner can always reach out to the agency. There's no cost associated with the agency evaluating a wetland on someone's property on request. The categorical Class 2 wetland types that are identified in the proposed language are wetlands of the same type and threshold size as those currently mapped on the VSWI. So these are open water ponds, emergent marshes, swamps, forested swamps, wet meadows, beaver ponds or beaver meadows, bogs or fens, and wetlands greater than half an acre in size. Wetlands that contain dense, persistent, non-woody vegetation or a prevalence of woody vegetation and are adjacent to a stream, river, or open body of water and are over 2,500 square feet in size. Vernal pools that provide amphibian breeding habitat, headwater wetlands, or wetlands that contain a species that appears in Vermont's Natural Heritage Inventory as rare, threatened, endangered, or uncommon. And the Natural Heritage Inventory is also a map layer that the agency provides and updates as those resources are identified. It's also relevant to note for this rulemaking that the agency is undertaking an update to the Vermont Significant Wetland Inventory to include these categorical Class 2 wetlands on the map. We're moving slowly in terms of that update. Right now, we've added wetlands to the Missisquoi Basin. Updates to the map require a detailed aerial interpretation and some on-the-ground verification of the wetland locations. And Laura can speak more to the mapping effort if there are questions about that. There are also a couple of proposed amendments to Section 8 of the rule regarding notice requirements for updates to the map. Section 8.3 is amended to add environmental notice bulletin noticing requirements for any proposed general wetland determinations. The environmental notice bulletin is now the agency's primary method for providing notice of various updates related to permits. And that was part of our update to adoption of Chapter 170 of Title 10 related to standardized permitting notice requirements for the agency. Section 8.5 is amended to add statewide noticing requirements for these VSWI map updates. And it also adds noticing requirements for map edits and revisions. Appendix A is amended to add Wards Marsh in West Haven and Esquimalt Bog in Heartland to the list of Class 1 wetlands. Wards Marsh is owned and managed by the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department and as a state wildlife management area. Surrounding land is owned by the Nature Conservancy. It's been determined to be exceptional or irreplaceable for a number of functions and values, has great recreational value and wildlife habitat, which Laura can also provide significantly more detail on some of the functions of these wetlands. Bog in Heartland is co-owned by the Native Plant Trust and the Nature Conservancy, has also been determined to be exceptional or irreplaceable as an exemplary wetland natural community and for habitat and a number of other critical wetland functions. That's the high-level overview. We can walk through the rule language, and Laura and I can also answer any specific questions that the committee has related to the proposed changes.
Questions for ANR? Representative Higley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I noticed you mentioned specifically the Missisquoi River Basin area. If there is a lot of changes in the new mapping, are current projects that are being considered and allowed now, is there a grandfathering or some form of working with those individuals, those landowners to continue to go forward? Or is it a basic no at this point because of the new mapping? And how's that going to work?
If a landowner has proposed a project and they have a determination in hand, like the agency or consultant has evaluated the wetlands on site, that determination remains in effect. The map itself doesn't modify decisions that have been made based on the ground evaluation. If somebody is proposing a new project but has not evaluated wetlands on site and there are significant wetlands, they would be expected to conduct the same evaluation that anyone proposing new development would be required to.
And then if I could, Mr. Chair, you'd also talked about maps, and it sounds like these aren't completed yet. But are they going to be available to individual towns in the town clerk's office, or is it only going to be through the agency that you'll be able to look at these maps?
We've actually talked about ways that we can make the maps more accessible because it does require having access to the internet and being able to download pull up the agency's mapping layer. I think that we've managed to take some snapshots to provide hard copies to clerks' offices.
Yeah, certainly. We, individuals contact us all the time and can request the information of the mapping that we can snail mail or email to them. We also do site visits as well, so we can verify the mapping.
Yeah, I think that's very important because, again, a lot of individuals that even come into the local town clerk's office, maybe even looking to purchase a piece of property, need to know that information as quickly as possible because there has been some instances where individuals purchase a piece and then find out afterwards they can't do anything with it. And that's a real concern.
Yeah, we've our outreach on this mapping update, it's been available as an advisory layer too. So we've had the program updates the advisory layer as new wetlands are identified. And Laura's done a lot of outreach directly to municipalities and clerks' offices so that they're aware that there is this effort to update the map ongoing.
Okay, thank you.
I just have a quick question. I was reading through some of the comments and responses from the department, from the agency. A lot of the wetland mapping has been done through remote sensing and things like that. And I suspect that there have been lots of issues, right? There have been inaccuracies in that mapping. Is it fair to say that the technology around remote sensing is much better today than it was a few decades ago?
That's fair to say. And I'll let Laura speak to.
Yeah, certainly
there.
having LiDAR elevational information flown for the entire state will help us with consistency as we do updates throughout the state, along with much better aerial photographs than some of these maps that were drawn in the 70s, 1990s. It's important to note that the mapping is a planning tool. So it's always, our jurisdiction is always based off of what's on the ground, the three parameters: hydrology, soils, hydric soils, and water-loving plants. So whenever someone has mapping, they're notified that there's probably something jurisdictional on their property that they need to evaluate further, that the program staff can come out and help them with finding the exact boundaries, and they can hire a consultant for that as well.
Senator Bray.
I don't know if there's further committee questions, but to help us out, just propose.
Well, I just want to see if Karina Daly would like to speak since you're on the list.
Thank you.
So I'm Karina Daly. I'm a restoration ecologist with Vermont Natural Resources Council. Some of you look familiar, but, I'm also a professionally certified wetland scientist. And in my past life, I was a consulting wetland scientist for 15 years. So I have lots of experience on the ground with wetland mapping, conducting wetlands delineations, and seeing a lot of unintentional violations of wetlands because of poor mapping. So I really think about a big portion of this rule change is a story of getting better data. We need better data to regulate. And part of that is this mapping update, which the accuracy of the LiDAR, the GPS technology, and the GIS technology is really improved. I think U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with their NWI mapping is 98% accuracy. And it's that same methodology that's being employed here with the mapping updates. So with that mapping, we can improve protections for our wetlands and avoid those violations, those unintentional violations. So we will ultimately have a better planning tool to protect our wetlands and design around them, which will save a lot of frustration. And I think I commend the Wetlands Program in the work they did to solicit public input. They held public meetings, and the rules as proposed really support the governing statute, and we encourage Leichhardt to move forward with that and support the rule to change as proposed.
Senator McDonald.
Mr. Chair, the last time we had a wetlands rule, we had a BGS issue, and it wasn't buildings and grounds. And at the last minute, the Black Gum Swamp disappeared from the designation as wetlands, and it came as a surprise to Elkhart because it was on the agenda for part of a greater approval. And we were told there was a glitch or something, and that you'd get back to us. Is this when you're getting back to us on that?
I'm going to defer to the agency on that.
We did not include black gum as a class 1 in this wetland proposal. It is still, the determination that was made on the site remains in effect, but it hasn't been moved for rulemaking at this point.
Could you share with us why of the rule to carry out the law that has the research has been done, it's been brought here once, still has not been proposed as a rule?
One of the things the agency tries to do when moving forward with the class 1 recommendations is to solicit feedback from the community in which the class 1 wetlands located. And we received significant pushback from the community regarding reclassification of the Black Gum Swamp. I don't think that it's off the table by any means. It wasn't included in this effort because we still hadn't been able to reach any kind of consensus with the local community about.
So when you say there was pushback about reclassification of a Black Gum Swamp, it is in fact a swamp, and
it is a swamp, yes.
But it's not a wetland.
No, it's a wetland.
It's protected as a class 2 wetland.
Yeah. Class 1. It's a significant wetland. It has significant function and value, and anyone who attempted to, conduct an activity in that wetland would be subject to the permitting requirements associated with a class 2 wetland. It has not been designated as class 1, which obviously increases the protections and further limits any kind of land use in the area. I think the objection from the community was based on concern that they wouldn't be able to maintain recreational trails and logging activities in the area. It has been a couple years though, and the agency is focused on classification of other wetlands as petitions have come in.
Does the law call for logging in wetlands?
The rule has a series of allowed uses that are still allowed within class 1 wetlands, and one of them is silviculture. So for logging for the sake of forest management is still an allowed use in a Class 1 wetland. It needs a plan approved by the Commissioner of Forest Parks and Recreation in order for them to do that for a Class 1 wetland. Given that the significance of the wetland is the fact that it has black gum trees, which are very uncommon in the state of Vermont and are more of a southern species, I would think that the whatever forestry plan would come in would likely have them avoid the logging of the black gum swamp specifically.
Well, I'm trying to remember how many years ago that was that we were told to, when the agency recommended that it not be approved as a wetland because there was more to take a look at. I'd be surprised that it hasn't shown up here.
Yeah.
It's still at the end of some list or what?
It's still on the list. It's still part of the Tactical Basin Plan as a candidate for Class 1 designation. It was around 2016 or 2017 that we came to LCAR with it. The last update that we did to the rule for adding Beaver Meadows in Ripton, we had contacted the select board at the time and we received a letter of non-support from the select board, which was in 2020.
Senator Lyons.
Well, we're starting to get into some of the policy discussion, but it would be great to have our committees of jurisdiction just evaluate how all of this sugars off. I know black gum doesn't give us sugar, but in particular, as you're saying, as you've expressed, that the select board is contrary to the classification, then it will be interesting for committees of jurisdiction to look upon what data is utilized for all those decisions as they're made and what public hearings are held to ensure that a full voice of a community is heard. Declaring Class 1 is pretty significant, but it's also important. Something that I think we on LCAR have heard about before, something maybe we should let committees of jurisdiction know about.
Senator Bray.
I have a question, I think, for Senator Lyons. Are you proposing that we send a letter to committees of jurisdiction?
When we get there, yes, I am. Yeah, I am. It's an ongoing issue. I mean, it may seem trivial and small to some and very great to others who live in the area, but I think it's something that needs some resolution.
So without trying to prevent further conversation on it, but to help us along, I was going to say I would like to move adoption of Rule 22P24.
Representative Higley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, we may be talking policy here, but I have to disagree with the senator a little bit. I'm glad to hear that the agency is working with towns and communities in regards to some of their concerns. If you're telling me that raising a classification to a Class 1 wouldn't allow trails and walking paths within it, that's a concern to me, and I can certainly understand why communities would step back from that. So again, I applaud what I just heard because again, I hear so much from individuals in towns that are so fearful of getting the Agency of Natural Resources involved in anything. So again, I commend you for your efforts to work with communities.
Yeah, we just to correct the record here, there isn't a prohibition on maintaining trails in Class 1 wetlands. We did try to I think that some of the concerns maybe of the community weren't fully explored. I think there was just more of a general fear around the reclassification. There is significant activity still allowed in Class 1 wetlands, including recreation.
Yeah, so there are trails in and around the Black Gum Swamps. We went down there and we discussed some of their ideas for new trails or trail reroutes to avoid more sensitive areas. And we feel like there are solutions for trails on that project. Eshqua Bog has a boardwalk running through it, and that's part of the reason why it's considered exemplary, is because thousands of people come to it every year for wildflower viewing and bird watching.
Thank you for that explanation.
Do we have a motion? Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I understand that we're going to be talking about letters to. Okay, next, we've got about 10 minutes or so. And we have a number of items here, but I was hoping we could get through. We may not get through them all, but let's take them in order. This is sort of an old action item, which was letters to the chairs of Senate Health and Welfare and House Healthcare Committee regarding the Katie Beckett Medicaid tool, right? Anthony,
So if you'll remember back to when you had those, I think it was the 4 HBEE rules. One of the rules, we heard testimony about how it referenced the use of a tool, but the tool hadn't been developed yet. And there was just concern about the process of developing the tool and who was involved when, and why the tool hadn't been developed prior to it being referenced in one of the rules that was being adopted. So this is a memo that would go, and it would need to be updated to make a number of changes to the recipient, because the chair of House Healthcare has changed, and obviously the date needs to shift forward. But it would be asking the committees of jurisdiction, and it references some of the testimony that was there, to look at the development of the tool. So the two items that are being requested to have looked at by the committees of jurisdiction, and this is at the bottom of the first page. While AHS provided testimony on the process that has been taken thus far to develop the standardized assessment tool reviewed by cross-disciplinary clinicians and plans for and commitment to future stakeholder engagement, one or more members of LCAR are concerned that the HBE rule expected to be effective in January of 2023, so it's already effective now, I believe, will now include reference to the standardized assessment tool, which has not yet been made available, even in draft form, to members of the public. So that's concern that the tool is referenced, not yet made available to the public. And second concern is that the process for AHS to eventually solicit stakeholder engagement as part of the development of the standardized assessment tool might not be sufficiently broad and might not properly address on an ongoing basis changes to the evolving standard of what is an institutional level of care. So asking the two healthcare committees to look at those two concerns. And this would require to be sent under Section 817 of the APA, a majority vote of the committee.
any discussion? I have a motion.
I'll move we send the letter as drafted.
Okay, we have a motion for Senator Lyons. Any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. 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 Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item, I think you saw the notes. Yeah, I think I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. So I think a bit of concern or frustration that has been felt by members of LCAR recently as you've been working through some of these rules that touch upon whether or not there is consistency with legislative intent is that you are 8 members of an 108 member bicameral bodies, and you don't necessarily know what the legislative intent was, and you rely on the chairs of the committees of jurisdiction to complete the questionnaires that you sometimes get that ask for feedback on whether or not a rule is consistent with legislative intent, among the other grounds that LCAR can object to a rule on. And sometimes the chairs don't return those forms. Sometimes those chairs weren't the chairs of the committee when it worked on the legislation that delegated the rulemaking authority or amended the delegation of the rulemaking authority, and just a little bit of frustration in that you don't necessarily know everything that happened years ago. So this is not a new frustration. Back in 2013, LCAR sent a memo to the then chairs of the committees of jurisdiction, just politely alerting them to the fact that under statute, and this is in 2 VSA section 205, whatever a standing committee introduces or amends proposed legislation which delegates rulemaking authority to a state agency, the committee shall express in the legislation and to the greatest extent possible the intent of the legislation and the scope of the rulemaking authority being delegated. So what this memo would do is, once again, a decade later, remind the chairs of the committees of jurisdiction of this statutory requirement. And also, and this is a difference from the memo that was sent in 2013, it would also be sent to Jennifer Carby, who's the Director and Chief Counsel for Legislative Counsel. So she's the boss of all the attorneys, to have the message also conveyed to me and my colleagues that this is something that we should be sort of on hand, ready to help with the drafting when committees are dealing with a delegation of rulemaking authority in new legislation. And Jen knows that this is going to be sent to her. She's seen the memo. So that is kind of the history behind it, the impetus of it, and what the memo is conveying. And for those of you who might not have known, and I didn't know about this until partway through my tenure of staffing LCAR, about the language in Title II that is telling the committees of jurisdiction to include information on legislative intent.
That's great.
Yeah.
Senator Bray.
Yeah. It's great. One, same here. I didn't realize until you did your memo that there was a statutory direction to do that. And because of my LCAR experience, it's made me, the chair, much more aware of trying to be precise about how we elect and delegate. And we've actually started adding intent sections to the bills we're doing, with an eye towards making it easier for LCAR to evaluate. The only, and I suppose as long as we draft them well, I just wondered if they were not well expressed, if we would ever limit the ability of LCAR to examine a rule. So I guess that's on us to put the expression of intent.
Yeah, that is a concern. If you 5 years later have LCAR saying they want to object, because I'm just going to pick a ridiculous example. The rule says that, all filing forms need to be yellow, and then something has happened in yellow papers and, high demand or short supply, and the agency wants to use blue paper, and then that's inconsistent with legislative intent. You would be in a position where, your hands are a little bit tied there. And then I will just remind you that just because something is inconsistent with legislative intent doesn't mean LCAR needs to object on the grounds that it's inconsistent with legislative intent. And there is language in the APA in both the emergency rule section and the permanent rule section that says basically a lack of objection is not an indication of legal, I'm not going to paraphrase, I'm just going to read. The failure of the committee to object to a rule is not an implied legislative authorization of its substantive or procedural lawfulness. So LCAR, and you've made this choice, I'm going to use one of the emergency rules that you had from DCF, wasn't dealing with legislative intent, but you didn't think there was an emergency. You decided not to object, even though you didn't think there were the grounds for emergency rulemaking. So LCAR does have the ability to kind of turn a blind eye given change in circumstances or, just how they feel about not putting that blemish on the rule with the certified objection. But yeah, it's totally a concern always with legislative intent, is if it's going to make things more difficult in the future in any potential litigation over legislation. So sometimes helpful, sometimes not so helpful.
Okay.
I wondered, let me ask a question.
Yes.
I wondered, two questions. One is there any downside to putting legislative intent in a bill?
In general, or?
Yeah. What would be some downsides of that?
If you put legislative intent in a bill and it is inconsistent with the kind of history behind all of the legislative intent. So, if you're a detective and you're trying to deduce what the legislative intent is, you're going to be looking to testimony in committee and all of this is recorded. And if there's ever litigation, those are the things that the Attorney General's office is going to potentially be looking to and trying to, defend the legal authority of a rule. And if it's being interpreted in a way that's consistent with legislative intent, looking to how the committee made amendments to things or what testimony witnesses provided. And it is a big part of any resulting litigation related to legislation to look at legislative intent. So again, it can be helpful, but it also could kind of bind the hands of future defense of statute.
Okay. And then, so if you were a committee and you decided, well, I'm not going to do that, you could, I'm not going to put legislative intent in, but you knew that you were going to send to rulemaking the law, then can you include intent or with that request for rulemaking so that you have an intent there?
Yeah, so that's what 2 VSA section 205 speaks to. It's not saying committees, whenever you're taking up any legislation, to the extent possible, you need to express legislative intent. It's saying for purposes of the delegation of rulemaking, that's when you should, if possible, express legislative intent. And that does make sense because there's the nexus to what LCAR can object to a rule on, because that is one of the grounds that LCAR can object to a rule is that it's inconsistent with legislative intent. So there's that need for you to fulfill your roles on LCAR to know legislative intent in a way that's maybe not as required in other facets of the work that you do in creating the laws of the state.
Okay, I need to step in here because of time. Okay. I don't think we're going to vote on this right now. I think we'll postpone action on this. And I think this is good work. I think we need to do something. But let's take this up at the next meeting. We're going to lose a couple of weeks in the session. I get that, but it is what it is. And I want to be aware of people's time right now. This is packing up their stuff and putting their jackets on. So if that's okay with everyone, the next meeting will be on the 2nd because we only have one more rule. So we won't be meeting next week. I'm not sure what that rule is, but I think you. The other thing too is that I will work, we have 2 issues, issues for letters to committees of jurisdiction on pesticides, and a number of issues there, and also on the wetlands. So we don't need to vote or do anything with that right now until our council has produced a document. So I'll work with Anthea on what needs to be in those documents. We'll have that conversation and we'll present those at the next meeting. Okay?
Yeah, on the pesticide rule, if you're looking for what should be in the rule, I think we need to really say something about native bees.
It's on my list.
Okay.
Okay. We'll circulate it and get feedback. Okay? With that.
When's the appointment of LCAR members? Before the next meeting?
It could be. I haven't heard anything from anyone. Have you heard anything on your side of things?
I was asked, about appointment to this committee, so.
So was
if
we
LCAR
haven't heard
members.
anything in the house, have we?
Within 10 minutes ago, we were.
What?
It just came.
What just came?
And asking if we wanted to be reappointed.
Okay.
You've got it, I suspect.
Okay.
So leadership on both.
So it could change.
Both
at the
bodies
next-
is seeking to make reappointment or new member decisions. Be advised in case you wish to speak to your leadership about
Okay.
it. Right, yep.
I was just gonna say, under the APA, your terms run on the 1st of February. So if you're not meeting again until February 2nd, I think under statute, the appointments will need to have been made
Yes.
before your next meeting.
That time we'll have to do some voting and for chair and vice chair.
Do you like a motion?
Don't need a motion.
I don't see.
Nope. Meeting's over.
9:04, I will note that.
Seth, I don't see a